and welcome to our SolarPower Summit 2021, which is 100% dedicated to driving sustainable change. I am Walburga Hemmetsberger, CEO of SolarPower Europe. It is really great to have you with us today. I am reaching out to you from our SolarPower Summit studio here at the heart of European decision making. And by the way, this is not just our studio, but also our new SolarPower Europe office. And as soon as the COVID situation allows, I would really love to welcome you here in our office. Please visit us, have a solar roasted coffee with us together, with a view over the European Commission's main building here, the Parlement and the Council. We have some very exciting sessions prepared for you over the next 3 days, with high-level decision makers, business leaders, experts and thought leaders. Driving sustainable change has a lot to do with deploying renewables, obviously, and solar in particular. We will be discussing the ingredients for solar to thrive, but driving sustainable change also goes beyond. It is about leadership in sustainability. We are very pleased to present to you on day 3 of the summit our new solar sustainability best practices, and on day 2, our new agri-solar best practice guidelines, where sustainability also plays a major role. Sustainability will be the connecting theme of all the sessions, covering topics such as solar manufacturing in Europe, solar for businesses, solar to hydrogen, and the Green Deal diplomacy. You will also have the opportunity to directly contribute to the summit by voting for our solar awards. This year, for the first time, we added 2 new awards that recognize achievements in sustainability and gender diversity. And for the 4th year in a row, we will also be celebrating excellence in our Startup Awards. But first, let me introduce Aristotelis Chantavas, Head of Europe at Enel Green Power and our President of SolarPower Europe. Obviously, at SolarPower Europe, we believe that a key driver for sustainable change is solar, and Aristotelis will share with you the state of solar today. Hello, good morning, Telis. You are in Athens, and I think I do not have to ask you whether the sun is shining there today. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Walburga. Good morning from Athens. The sun is shining all around Europe today. It's of course shining in Athens as well. We have the SolarPower Summit this week, a milestone event for solar in our continent, in Europe, and it's an opportunity for all of us to celebrate the sunshine all together. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and happiness for being here today doing the opening speech at SolarPower Summit. It's an opportunity to illustrate briefly what we do to drive sustainable change in our continent, in our industry, in our lives in general. Let's move on to the next slide and start by saying that we are glad to be able to say that solar power in the European Union has shown a strong resilience in 2020 despite COVID negatively impacting everyone's life in many aspects. For those who are following the solar sector for a while, the positive surprises are not something unfamiliar. These include surpassing expectations in terms of steep cost reduction, flexibility, user-friendliness, manifold applications, and obviously its rapid growth rate. The last surprise has been a really big one. The solar market not only grew in a year defined by the pandemic, but even in double digits, by 11% to 18.2 gigawatts. This amount of annual installed capacity was not observed since 2011 in Europe. When we look at total installed capacities, we see the same pattern. In 2020, 22 of the 27 EU member states installed more solar than the year before. Like in the previous year, solar again added more capacity than any other power generation technology in the EU 27. Last year, solar and wind added 29 gigawatts, of which solar contributed nearly two-thirds. On a net basis, all fossil fuel technologies, nuclear and hydro, saw a reduction in their new capacities compared to the year before. We expect a 23% boost for 2021, and as of 2023, we are anticipating a solar deployment of above the 30 gigawatts level, 30.8 gigawatts in 2023 and 35.1 gigawatts in 2024. The cumulative PV market scenarios from 21 to 24 show a constant two-digit annual growth rate. The medium scenario forecasts 16 to 17% growth rates, reaching 252.9 gigawatts installed capacity at the end of 2024 from 137.2 gigawatts today. This is a remarkable progress. Some might think that even our realistic scenario is too optimistic, but you just have to look at recent announcements to get an impression of the current solar dynamics in Europe. The sector is booming. While this seems already ambitious, we need to see much more renewables to decarbonize our continent. SolarPower Europe conducted a study for 2050 together with Lund University. It shows that as of 2040, solar PV becomes the dominant source of electricity generation across all three scenarios. And by 2050, solar reaches at least 48% share in the laggard scenario, which still has a portion of fossil fuels operating in 2050. In our moderate scenario, this would translate into 4.7 terawatts of solar by 2050. But even for the non-Paris compatible laggard scenario, we would need to install around 150 gigawatts of solar per year. This is equal to today's total installed capacity in the EU 27. The COVID crisis has triggered an unprecedented momentum to drive structural reforms to fight the climate change. As the most cost-efficient, job-intensive, and versatile renewable energy technology, solar can be a key enabler for a green recovery. At SolarPower Europe, we are committed not only to driving change, but placing sustainability at the core of everything we are doing. Driving change starts by looking at yourself to keep improving as a sector. By 2050, solar will become Europe's mainstream source of energy. The figures were presented earlier. With such a great responsibility, it is critical to ensure that solar abides by the highest sustainability standards. It's our responsibility. At SolarPower Europe, we are convinced that sustainability and industrial strategy are two sides of the same coin. Europe is the cradle of solar and the world leader of cutting-edge, sustainable solar technologies. Therefore, in 2021, SolarPower Europe will, in particular, pursue the European Solar Initiative to support innovative manufacturing projects in Europe and develop a white paper on appropriate incentives for such projects. Also, we will support through leadership in sustainability, social responsibility, and corporate governance with several initiatives, with our first edition of the Solar Sustainability Best Practices, which will be presented on day 3 of the SolarPower Summit. Also, by developing a sustainability tracker. Driving the sustainable change also means ambition. EU policymakers recently adopted the European Climate Law. We are now set for an emission reduction of at least 55% by 2030. The upcoming Fit for 55 package and the revision of the Energy and Environment State Aid Guidelines will be pivotal to ensure that solar benefits from the right regulatory framework to deliver on its ambition and drive sustainable change. SolarPower Europe's team is fully dedicated, asking policymakers to implement a legislative framework that supports the solar sector's ambitions. As part of the review of the Renewable Energy Directive, Europe needs to increase the renewable target by 2030 to at least 45% of Europe's final energy demand. In order to achieve these targets, it's fundamental to foster permitting simplification by publishing European permitting guidelines. Moreover, the directive needs to develop a better framework for power purchase agreements and commercial and industrial rooftops. Also, the Energy Efficiency Directive needs to include mandatory provisions for rooftop solar in buildings. And finally, the Energy and Environment State Aid Guidelines need to adapt support schemes to the maturing solar markets, supporting innovation, for example floating and agri-PV, new business models with PPAs, and different technologies with storage and hydrogen. Renewable-based electrification is the key to deliver a renewable-based energy system and achieve climate neutrality in the most cost-efficient way. According to our study, SolarPower Europe's 2050 study, at least 85% of our economy will need to be electrified to fully decarbonize all sectors. And renewables will need to provide the input for renewable hydrogen, which will be needed in the long run. To drive this vision, we need to clearly promote electrification as part of the Fit for 55 package, the key driver to decarbonize sectors of the economy such as heating, cooling, transport and industry. And we must upgrade and modernize our electricity grids. The revision of the Trans-European Networks for Energy Regulation, the so-called TENI, will therefore be critical. Finally, for a full decarbonization, we will need to identify priority sectors to form the bulk of EU's future demand for renewable hydrogen, with a prime focus on existing hydrogen users and hard to electrify sectors. We must act now. We can act now. 37% of the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility, 750 billion euros in total, will be earmarked for the climate-related expenditures. Electrification, as well as the deployment of solar and smart energy systems, have been identified by the EU Commission as a priority area. There is no more time to waste. I hope that you will enjoy the 2021 online edition of our SolarPower Summit. which addresses all the aforementioned topics. I would like to ask you, our members and distinguished attendees, to join forces with us in driving sustainable change for our children and their own children. Thank you and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Aristotelis, for sharing with us how solar is driving sustainable change and what it needs to unleash its full potential. Becoming climate neutral by 2050 is a huge task. Our 2050 study shows when it comes to energy, solar will be among the main drivers. Aristotelis has just given you the figures. Driving sustainable change for SolarPower Europe, that means basing our society 100% on renewables. Because simply, it is the cheapest. And money matters if we want to have everyone on board. But obviously, we as the solar sector cannot do it on our own. We need strong partners, relentlessly working towards the same goal to decarbonize Europe, making sure at the same time it is not only saving our climate, but also contributing to economic growth. And that is why I am very, very happy to have key partners here with us today. We are all driving change together. We are looking at a big challenge, and we have a big panel today. We want to hear all perspectives and discuss how, together, we can turn the challenge into an opportunity, overcoming stumble blocks and be successful. But before I'm turning to the participants of our panel, I would like to invite you to engage with us on social media using the hashtag SolarPower Summit. Now, to my panel, to my distinguished panel. Here with me are the Secretary Generals and CEOs of key industry associations. And I would like to introduce all of you very quickly. We have Ariana Vitali from the Coalition for Energy Savings, Christian Robi, Euroelectric, Diederik Pereboom from TND, Yorgo Chatzimarkakis, Hydrogen Europe, Giles Dixon, Wind Europe. We have Julie Beaufils from Europe On, and Marco Menzik, Cefic, the chemical industry. Marco, as I see you on the screen on my right side, and I've addressed you last, the first question to you. The EU Green Deal is a real paradigm shift. It is really not about decarbonization, but it is also developing a new growth strategy for Europe, where clean energy technologies have to fight climate change, but clean energy technologies should also put us in a position in Europe to be very competitive globally, to create jobs, and to have a thriving industry. So from an industry perspective, from the perspective of the chemical industry, and the chemical industry has a very important role to play. You have more than 1 million jobs, more than 500 billion euro turnover. So a major contributor to Europe's GDP. So what, from your perspective, do we need to remain globally competitive? And what do you think about the growth strategy?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having us on the panel. I think we're becoming a practice team with Giles and Yorgo and Christian and you in driving this change together. So it's a pleasure here. For the chemical industry, which we sometimes call the mother of all industries, not that we want to be someone's mother, but we're in every value chain giving input in Europe. We're still the fourth industry in Europe. We're one of the strongest. We're bringing I think 46 billion is the last number of import value back into Europe. This is the moment. This is the crucial part where we indeed change from one cycle into another. And for us, it's what we call double twin transition. For most sectors, if you look at steel or cement, it's about becoming climate neutral and digital. For us, it's climate neutral, digital, circular, and safe and sustainable by design in chemical terms. It's four transitions in one. It's one of the reasons why we call for a sectoral green deal or a future chemicals deal, because if you look in detail, it's not only about do you do what you do in a sustainable way, it's in our case as well, is what you produce, is that sustainable? And what you produce is sustainable, can you produce that in a sustainable way? Now, if you combine that with the energy transition, you'll see the Cefic position having shifted from in all honesty, a decade ago saying, oh, renewables might be too expensive, to we need all the renewable electrons we can get. And that's why we partner with solar power, with wind as well. On top, we need a really well thought through hydrogen strategy, where again, we're the biggest producer and we're going to be the biggest consumer of hydrogen for quite a while. But we need to electrify what's smart, where it brings the most value. We then will need additional electricity to use hydrogen, where that brings the most value. And then we need to design breakthrough technologies like e-crackers, where the first announcements have been made, or renewable methanol, bio-based, CO2-based chemistry. It all comes at once. So if I can summarize, we went from, and I've used that picture, the Solvay conference with Einstein, Marie Curie, Rutherford, and Solvay, 1927. We're now almost in 2027, 100 years later. At that time, a single family put all its fortune on new chemical technologies, saying, let's go for it. We had a sort of a stop in 1973, oil crisis. We invented Playmobil, which was a crucial moment in history as well. And we're now here, and we're jumping into this next curve for the chemical industry. Now, what do we need? We very much need an integration of policy. We're in a ring with so many players, with so many changes coming from every side. The real issue is the next two investments do matter. And that means for us, we've analyzed that. We don't have the shale gas like the US. We don't have the army of engineers like China. But we do have the integration and the cooperation. We can merge with the power sector, with the waste sector, with the renewable sector in being both your supplier of new materials, making wind and solar recyclable, making renewables recyclable, making it safe and sustainable by designing its chemistry, and having an enormous demand and a role as a demander in the electricity networks to make sure this all fits together. That's as a start for today.
Many different facets. Integration is a key word. You mentioned you need a lot of electrons, cheap electrons. You need hydrogen in order to be successful. When we talk about cheap electrons, let me tackle that first. Wind and solar today are the cheapest electricity probably in history. Giles, is it enough to be cheap? Or do we need something else? And what else do we need in order to cover the needs Marco just pointed to?
Thank you, Valburga. It is absolutely not enough on its own to be cheap. You can be as cheap as you like in wind and solar, but it's no good if two things aren't working properly. Number one, if we can't get permits to build new wind and solar. And today, the permitting rules and procedures for building new renewables are far too complex in all countries of Europe. It's taking far too long to get permits. It's costing so much to get permits that a lot of renewables developers are just turning their back on the industry. Also, there's a shortage of staff in the permitting authorities at all levels of government, and that has got to be sorted out. The second thing that we've got to get right is we can build as much wind and solar as we like, but it's no good if we don't have the grid that will take those renewables to the consumer. That means investing more in electricity networks, both onshore and offshore, interconnectors, investing in smart grid and all the flexibility that needs to go with that, and also spending money to optimize our existing grid capacities.
Thanks, Giles. That brings me to Diederik. Diederik, you're representing the infrastructure. How can you help Giles? What is it that you can do to help Giles in order to upgrade infrastructure and make it smarter?
Well, I mean, I think the Giles made the perfect pitch for the grid technology sector, and I think we're already closely working together and helping each other. From our perspective, the three things that you need for the Green Deal to succeed are policy and regulation, technology, and investments. From our perspective, the policy and regulation, to a large part, are in place. There's still things to be done when you get to the practicalities of it, but we have a good framework in Europe. Technology, we say we have, and in case we don't have it or it doesn't yet function exactly properly, we can resolve it. We have the brains, we have the networks to do that. So the key thing is really to come down to what Giles mentioned. We need investments in the grid. That's what's really key to enable this green transition. And I would like to say a few words about investments, because very often when we speak about investments, people exclusively think about building new lines, which of course is important to build the lines connecting the new wind farms that Giles is going to build and the solar plants that are emerging. But it's much more. It's also refurbishing the aging equipment in the grid to make sure that we continue to benefit from the system that we have enjoyed over the past year, even more than before. We need to invest in increasing the hosting capacity of the existing grid. And we also need to kind of invest in automation and digitalization. And this is to the point of having more smarter grids to enable the flexibility that we need to deal with the different profile of wind and solar compared to large fossil fuel plants. So all these things we need to do, and the investments need to happen now. And I think Christian will probably speak about how he's connecting the dots. I think it's clear that we need it. The key point now is let's make it happen. Let's give this bump into investments over the coming years to 2030, because we need it if we are to succeed.
Thanks very much, Diederik, for helping me to transition to Christian, because indeed, Christian, you have been working at Euroelectric very much on the DSO level, what it needs on the distribution grid level, but also the transmission side. So what's your take on it? How can we make sure that these investments are taking place? What does it need? And maybe to elaborate a little bit more on that side of the energy transition, on electrification, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about networks. You in your studies, I think you do think that electrification will be around 60% of the energy, covering around 60% of the energy needs. We go a little bit higher at SolarPower Europe in our 2050 study. We do think, and that is a cost base, that we will have around 85% electrification. But whatever it is, it will be a lot. Do we do enough to promote electrification, or do we have to work more on that angle?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Valborga. I think it's important to say, regardless of whether we're talking 60% electrification or even 85 or more by 2050, we are looking at very, very steep curves. And that's why in Euroelectric, we're talking about an electric decade. There's no way around the fact that this decarbonization exercise is going to mean that the electricity sector moves at the very heart of the energy system. We're going to supply the building sector, the transport sector, and the industries with energy. And we're also going to help Jorgo create his clean hydrogen. And therefore, we need to look at this as a system challenge. We're going to work with integrating amounts of wind, solar. We're going to connect that with the grids, as mentioned by Diederik. But we need to look at this as a system challenge, one that allows us to reliably supply industries like Marco's with the necessary electricity for them to produce their product. Therefore, we need to look at a little bit of a broader scope of technologies. We need reliable technologies, dispatchable technologies, in addition to the technologies mentioned here today. And we need absolutely and critically the investments in the grids. We have a study that shows we need some 400 billion euros of investments in distribution grids over the next decade. And that's simply because the vast majority of technologies and generation capacity is going to be connected to that grid. We have an aging grid. Some 30% of the lines are 40 years old today. By 2030, it's going to be half of all the lines that are 40 years old. And it goes without saying that with 50 million electric cars, 50 million heat pumps, massive amounts of decentralized capacity, that's not going to work unless we make those investments. And I do think there's room for improvement here. This is especially at the national level, where we're seeing that the tariff structures and the way the DSOs are forced to work is not compatible with the pace of change that we're seeing. The general situation for a distribution system operator is that his city next door will announce that all buses are going electric, not by 2040, but by 2030 or by 2025. The ferry next door wants to go electric too, and they need a huge battery and some juice to power that every time the ferry comes in and wants to charge. And that's the story all around. The industrial installation in the next city wants to do an e-cracker, like Marco mentioned, and so on and so forth. The DSOs need to be able to work with this, to work with agility and speed, to be able to connect this. Otherwise, the business models will crumble for wind and solar. The businesses will see delays to connect their stuff. So we absolutely need a different type of mindset from the regulator to allow this to happen at greater speed. We need different tariff structures. This is a critical challenge for this coming decade. Last point about the fact, are we doing enough for electrification? Absolutely not. The current plans from the Commission foresee an addition of 500 gigawatts of capacity over the next decade. That's roughly half the power system we have today, but only a 1% increase in the share of electricity. So if that is going to be the case, we're going to have an oversupply of electricity, and we're going to have a bottleneck to the end-use sectors. So we absolutely need to open up the channels for that additional electricity into the hydrogen, into the transport sector, into the buildings, and into the industry. That's going to be a key task for all legislation that's coming as part of the Fit for 55.
Thanks, Christian. Oversupply of electricity, we need to channel it to hydrogen. Jorgo, electrification will not do it all. It will be a major contributor to decarbonizing. You are working relentlessly on getting renewable hydrogen into the market, making it more cost competitive, making it able for businesses like the ones Marco is representing to use hydrogen and be competitive. You are also trying to make sure that the hydrogen strategy, which is very much debated in Brussels today, can be delivered with clean hydrogen, with renewable hydrogen. What keeps you awake? What is the single most topic which keeps you awake in order to really succeed on this way?
Well, first of all, it's very important to cooperate. We, as hydrogen producers, will need a lot of electricity. So cheap electricity, and I fully support what Giles said, is key. And the transport of this electricity, and I fully support what Diederik and Christian said, is also key. So we need to work together. However, as we have heard, the grids are somehow limited. We need to ramp them up, and we do our utmost to support also the ramp up of electricity grids. It's important also for the hydrogen strategy. However, there's also another way out by using existing infrastructure, gas infrastructure that can be repurposed to use them to transport, disseminate hydrogen. Give you one example. Marco mentioned his industry. One of his biggest member is a customer consuming 2% of the global hydrogen production per day on a yearly basis. That's BASF. They could change directly from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen. So hydrogen that is produced by solar panels or by wind, directly from one day to the other, because hydrogen is a feedstock. So the chemical processes don't see the difference between gray and green, but the climate sees the differences. And our job now is to get this hydrogen, this green hydrogen, produced and cheaply brought to BASF, to give you one example. So that's the low-hanging fruit. But I can tell you what keeps me up at night. I'm very happy that we managed to cooperate all together, and that's a major achievement in order to make net zero a reality. What keeps me up is some regulatory hurdles that have been created basically, I don't know, in order to keep hydrogen expensive. That's in RED 2, the Renewable Energy Directive recast. There's one point which says you can do with green electricity whatever you want, with one exception: no hydrogen, unless you prove you build up additional capacities. It goes without saying that ramping up all of this will need additional capacities, but the way it is foreseen in the delegated act, which is to be brought to the member states and to the public in May, is very much a hurdle, a barrier, a burden to any investor. You wouldn't do that. We have a very, very good solution for that. It's to keep the principle of additionality, but to phase in 25. Because in order to achieve the goals of the EU hydrogen strategy, which is already 6 gigawatt of hydrogen production in 25, we need to ramp up now. And that is not possible with this very awkward bureaucratic principle of additionality that puts the burden of proof on the producer. There will be no investment. So I would like to invite all of you, but also invite especially the policymakers to rethink whether this principle of additionality should not be phased in as of 25. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jorgo. There's 2 points I would like to take up here. One is the question of infrastructure, indeed, because you said, we just use the infrastructure we already have. Some others are advocating for a new hydrogen backbone. So how does that work together? And the other thing, additionality, indeed, it's again, going faster when it comes to renewables, because we will need them for electrification. We will need them for hydrogen as well. So how can we make sure that we can be faster? Maybe on the hydrogen bottleneck first.
Well, the infrastructure, we have concrete plans how to start with these low-hanging fruits, being chemical industry, steel industry, and how to bring, so to say, these hotspots, these industrial hubs together via a backbone. That works with a repurposing of existing pipelines. Some member states like the Netherlands have already started in stopping L-gas, which is low calorific gas. So the pipelines are empty and they are repurposed and will be used for hydrogen already. So not all of the infrastructure will be repurposed, but the backbones connecting this industrial hubs in the beginning. And more also other sectors like mobility could profit from that. When it comes to ramping up fast, I think we should allow ourselves to really have a look at the watch and the timetable. If 25 and the 6 gigawatt are a target that we should achieve, and I think we all agree that it would abate a lot of CO2 and be very beneficial to the climate if we do that, then we need to remove these hurdles. The next 3 or 4 years will be important for investments. It goes without saying that we need additionality, but the burden of proof, that is something that will definitely not invite investors to say, oh, that's a good idea to do electrification, and in cases where we need it, I say against again the chemical industry, to invest also in the power to gas, so in the electrolyzer capacity. So that will not happen if this is not made clear from the very beginning. And the beginning is beginning of next year. So this year we are collecting projects, engineering them, also doing the financial engineering, trying to notify them until end of this year and implementing as of 22. So for 3 years, it will be a kick start phase, which is intense.
So do we need it indeed? And that's a question to all of you. Or are we risking, as some fear, are we risking greenwashing and being attacked on being too, being not strict enough when it comes to GOs? Any thoughts on that before I turn to another topic I would like to discuss with you? Giles.
Thank you, Valborga. There are many things in industry, in transport and heating, buildings that we can electrify. And wherever we can physically electrify something, then we should electrify it directly with renewable electricity, because it is more energy efficient and therefore it is cheaper to do so. But of course, there is a limit to how much of the energy system we can electrify. Christian says 60%, Valburga, you've said 85%. Physically, we cannot electrify everything. Certain things are, quote, hard to abate, especially in heavy industry, heavy duty transport. So renewable hydrogen is going to have to play a key role in those hard to abate sectors.
I possibly would like to add on the guarantees of origin that Valburga alluded upon. This is key. There will be no trustworthy system, and there will be a lot of greenwashing, of course, if we don't have this reliable, transparent, traceable, and trackable system of guarantees of origin. And we need, for the hydrogen system, a distinct system. If it comes to blending, there will be possibly some rules, existing rules to be applied. If it comes to clean hydrogen, and we have now a threshold that has been published with the taxonomy that defines what is clean, what is not. If we want to keep it clean, we need to abide strictly by this threshold and have a transparent guarantee of origin system. Otherwise, it will not work. And this is where we also need your support, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen. We need your support in order to have this distinct, transparent system up and running.
I think we all agree guarantees of origin are really very important. Marco, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. I think there's a puzzle still to cover, which besides the guarantees of origin and all of us cooperating is what was addressed shortly, but I think is underestimated, which is the volume we're going to need and the fact that we're all needing it at the same time. I was in a discussion with the automotive sector last week. If they get all the electric chargers they need to electrify the automotive sector, the electricity is simply not there for industry. If, like you said, everyone puts it in hydrogen, which might be a good solution in some places, but might just be a very inefficient one elsewhere. So one of the things we're going to need is what we say in Dutch, regie. I think you can translate it. A bit of orchestration in who gets what first when, which is also a balance between indeed transporting the energy in molecules, not only hydrogen, but also ammonia or other power to gas, power to X structures. Having industry central in the infrastructure, be it steel or chemicals. In a sense, we're going to be the nodes in the system of molecules and energy as well. But this everyone at the same time with the same demand somehow doesn't fit with we need the energy cheap. And I think we actually have multiple challenges. The cost of renewables have gone down massively, but 5/10 or even cheaper at sea doesn't mean we get it. By the time we get it on the site, it's probably 15 cents, which is 3 times the US price, and more than what we're going to pay in China. So it's the volume, which is massive, and we need as much as we get. It's the production cost, and you're bringing it down, and you've done an amazing job. It's the how do I get it for that same price on my site, which is a crucial problem still to come. And that's where we have the additional one. Everyone wants it at the same time, which means a hydrogen bus might be really useful, but maybe you could have used that hydrogen in industry and you would have saved many more emissions and could have electrified the bus in the meantime. There, I think we come to the final problem, which is 27 member states doing it on their own at the same time. This needs to become a European project. And that's where the integration and the grids and the interconnectors come in. Massive increase in production somewhere needs to end up somewhere else in the European Union. By definition, almost, this has to be a European project, and it can strengthen. Now, just one extra ambition: don't underestimate the Chinese and the US, because our industry gets the offers in the US now as well, where just throwing a cable over a fence is way easier, and having the wind farm next door way easier than in most parts of Europe. The Chinese are pushing hard, and we, I think, are a bit too complacent in thinking we're leading and as we usually do in Europe. We're pretty soon falling behind. So hit the gas is maybe a strange expression in a renewable electricity meeting, but hit the gas on this one and make sure we speed it up. And regulatory hurdles there, like the German AEG system, are just a stone in our shoe constantly, which need to be solved soon. But volume, price, getting it on site, having an integrated view, some regie, and not waiting, because soon we're not leading anymore, which is good for the planet. But as I'm very European, I'd rather be in front of the Chinese and the Americans. So
thanks, Marco. And the price element, I would really like to touch upon it a little bit later on. But first, I would also like to shed a little bit of light on other areas where we need to hit the gas, which is not the hardware we have been touching upon now at full extent, but the software. And by software, I mean the people which are behind the energy transition, those who have to get the cables in the houses, those who have to connect, for example, also solar panels to the grid. So skills at large, but you also touched upon we have to be as efficient as possible, Marco, and that's another topic I would like to discuss. But first, what is it that we need to do when it comes to skills? And Julie, you are representing a sector, the sector of electrical contractors, the guys who come to our places, install solar panels. What do you need? Is there enough? Are there enough installers out there to cover our needs? What is burning in your sector?
Thank you, Walburga. Yes, I think that we've been talking a lot about technologies until now, but yeah, in the end, there's an elephant in the room, and it doesn't just have 4 legs. It has many legs. That's the professionals, because no matter how much you invest in technologies and how much you advocate in favor of electrification, in the end, you need people to work on this. And this is precisely what electrical contractors do. In Europe, there are over 1.8 million electrical contractors. And in the past, a bit, as you said, we were pulling cables, but now the challenge is much more varied. We talked a lot about solar today, but that's actually just one example of the great diversity of roles that electrical contractors have in the electrification road. So for example, yeah, we do install PVs, but we also integrate them in the building system with battery storage, with EV chargers, etc. And we also have to ensure grid connection. So those are actually exciting times, because our sector needs to develop new varied careers which will be meaningful, because we are talking about decarbonization. And it also means that we will have, and we already have, massive job openings. That's actually good news, especially in such recovery times. We have jobs for young people who wish to start a career. We also have jobs for people who want to reskill from other sectors. However, many of European members tell me that they feel it's going to be very hard to find all the necessary professionals. And so I'm coming to the challenge part that you were asking about. First, we observe a lack of applicants. Many people nowadays favor academia over technical education, so that might be one hint of what's going on here. There's also an outdated image of the sector. That's why I'm really happy to be here talking about also solar technologies, wind technologies, and so on. And so that's one hurdle. Another hurdle is that we also need to accelerate even further the update of training programs, because as we said, there are new technologies. Well, solar and wind are not so new, but it's ever changing. And so it's ever calling for more skills and more people being able to fit with the skills. So we are working extensively on this, but we will need more support from policymakers and more collaboration with the whole value chain. That's why it was important for me to be here today in a session called Driving Change Together. And this brings me to my last comment, which is not so much on skills, but actually on working together, because electrical contractors should not be looked at just as subcontractors who come at the end of a project. If we want to electrify, if we want to have quality projects, we now need to work more closely together. That means seeing us all as part of this integration project. We see ourselves, for example, much more as integrators than installers or subcontractors. So we need early engagement of all actors on a project. We need enhanced collaboration. And with that, I think that we can really improve the electrification process. So in short, two main challenges: attracting more skilled professionals and better engaging with the whole value chain.
So early engagement, that's probably also addressed to you, Ariana, because when it comes to energy efficiency and you're representing the Coalition of Energy Savings, that is very much something which is happening in buildings, where installers are helping you to have renewables installed in these buildings. Energy efficiency for a very long time has been discussed in parallel with renewables. So we have these goals towards 2030 on both energy efficiency and renewables. When we talk about working together and achieving goals together, do you see that these two are getting more interlinked? Is it only about consuming less, or do you build in also more flexibility, which is useful for the integration of renewables?
Thank you very much for this question that I think is very relevant at this point in time. But yes, the short answer is that energy efficiency is key to provide flexibility to the energy system and to integrate as well renewables. And it does it in a way that is fast, fair, and attractive for consumer as a whole. And I'm going to explain briefly why. I think the starting point is that if you want to transition to clean resources, to renewable-based resources, you need to have a flexible system, and you do so by giving attention and start eliminating the wasteful and inflexible demand that prevents the system to work well and operate well. And energy efficiency does precisely that. It makes end uses much more dynamic and efficient. It reduces the energy needs, and therefore it reduces as well the size of the energy system. That is, of course, great advantages for a climate perspective and an environmental perspective, but it also has a great advantage on term of costs, as we have been discussing, previous panelists have been discussing. The use of energy efficiency allows to reduce investment costs and also all the costs associated with the energy generation, production, transmission, distribution, and use. So at the end of the day, you save money, and this money that is saved, it benefits consumers. So I think that to ensure a fully flexible, renewable-based energy system, demand of resources altogether, so energy efficiency and demand response, have a great role to play, because of course they can help reduce the investment, as I've already mentioned. They can be mobilized for short-term energy system needs, and they can also be able to moderate price spikes by reducing peak load. All of that is clearly an enabling for having a fully and more flexible energy system. This is where, for example, in the building sector, as I already mentioned, but also in transport, energy efficiency, renewables, and flexibilities goes hand in hand. I mean, a clear example, if you have a heat pump, this works well in energy efficient buildings, it performs well. And by the way, this is the case also for low carbon heat and low carbon networks. And the buildings, being a new one or a renovated, can act as a thermal storage and also enable then this heat pump to switch off at peak times and provide a flexibility service to the grid. So I think this is the type of system integration and system decarbonization that we are thinking of. And I think definitely that energy efficiency has a central role to play in it, also benefiting consumers. And just my last point, I think in that sense, there is a clear bottleneck. And the bottleneck is that we keep looking at all these elements I've mentioned so far in a separate way. So we look at energy efficiency on one side, we look at flexibility, we look at renewable. On the other hand, if we start looking at the energy system from a more comprehensive perspective, with a more holistic approach, it's clear that we can build on the synergies of all those elements and look at decarbonization and achieve it at a lower cost from a societal perspective. In that respect, I think energy efficiency can help and can be mainstreamed and should be supported when going forward.
Indeed, and that's why we are all together here. We need energy efficiency to reduce the volumes Marco was alluding to, the big volumes, so that we have a little bit less of a quantity we need to serve. Whom would you need from this round most in order to help you and achieve your goals?
Well, I think I will need all of you, I think, in a certain sense. And for me, the key point is just to start thinking that energy efficiency is not a second thought, but when you are thinking on how you are operating your network, on whether you need generation, whether you are installing your products in a building, whether you're trying to mobilize consumers, energy efficiency should be mainstreamed and can help this system. So I think it's more a change of perspective and not just having energy efficiency coming after, but having it fully integrated in your activities and planning considerations that you are doing from the start.
Thanks, Ariana. Maybe turning back to Marco. Marco, you as a chemical sector, obviously you're a big consumer of energy, as you also pointed out. But you are also innovating. You're a very innovative sector. How can the chemical sector help all of us to really overcome this challenge and be successful in the energy transition?
So I think the first answer, and that's where it's great that Ariana is here, we need to change the paradigm from saying, can we decarbonize, to how can we decarbonize? And you get very different answers if you put the brains together. Because if you ask, can we, most people say, it's such a huge volume, we can't do. If you say, how can we, you actually get answers. And we see that change throughout the companies. And you've seen some big announcements recently, which are coming from the question, how can we do it? In that sense, the efficiency comes in, the use of heat pumps in industry comes in, the low-hanging fruit comes in. And I think more and more is feasible. So step one is mindset, and we can help deliver the mindset to bring the solutions. Step two is that you'll see the chemical industry constantly innovating to supply new materials, new lightweight materials. We've made massive improvement with the wind sector and Giles. We've made massive improvements, I think, also with the chemistry for solar panels. I need to say the one thing we're going to need there is, and that's where the puzzle needs to come together, we need to then make sure that this enormous amount of investment we're going to do is also being supplied to a large extent by European industry. And this is not just say by European, but if you make this massive change, if you spend this enormous amount of tax money on the transformation, it would be pretty weird to not make sure the jobs end up with us and the manufacturing end up with us. So that's where things need to be put together. And then we also, in that sense, need to make sure the innovations we do, which under the chemical policy, safe and sustainable by design, are actually finding a competitive environment, and our suppliers are not looking elsewhere to bring in the chemistries. And that's maybe the role of the chemical industry, but also of the policymakers. It's not only the pharmaceuticals. I would say it's also the renewables and the energy efficiency solutions, where we want to have a core in Europe and not depend on others, because the race is on around the globe. That's where the close connection between us and our main customers, the automotive sector, the energy sector, the industrial sectors, that's what will make us win. I'm sort of competitive. Using the knowledge and the power of the chemical industry to find the new energy efficiency solutions, to develop the new materials for even larger wind blades or even better solar panels, I think that's the strength Europe has. And that's where you'll see, from computing power and digitalization to the design of new molecules to combining, and I have one black box on my screen. Number 10 would be the waste sector, to circular the economy in getting the waste as a feedstock and an energy source and a source for renewable methanol or hydrogen, etc. If you combine that and you integrate from our current system into even further integration.
We can't hear you anymore. You're mute, Marco. The last.
That's a good sign to end. No, that's where you see chemicals are everywhere in a sense. It's molecules plus electrons, which are the integration in the system. And we can provide newer molecules, better molecules, transport means as molecules, and then even the waste gas from a steel plant being turned into a feedstock for chemicals, in a sense, is the same discussion as we're having here. And like said before, where we're going to need all of you to partner and keep this strong industrial base in Europe.
You are really bringing up a very, very important point, Marco. Producing in Europe, having the value created also in Europe. When it comes to renewables, we are providing 3 times as much jobs in Europe locally, both wind and solar, for deploying renewables. But it's also important to have manufacturing in Europe, and that's why it is really, really very important to have a focus on the renewables industry also in Europe, and that's what we are at SolarPower Europe advocating for. To have more, I mean, some of your members, Marco, are global players in the solar sector. Polysilicon is a global player based in Europe, based in Germany, where we have Wacker. But others need to come back also to Europe. So we're very much advocating for having these renewables industries also in Europe. And that's, I should post the questions here, but that's just a remark from my side. Maybe Giles, you want to comment on that?
Can I jump in before Giles? I'm sorry to be impolite, Giles, but we now have the debate on active pharmaceutical ingredients. We've just found out we were completely dependent on India and China for one chemical plant to give us the production of some medication. We've now seen we depend on one plastic bag producer to make lipids for the vaccines. So we've all of a sudden realized in the times of shock that we were so integrated around the world, we're depending on single factories somewhere in China or India. The same applies, you mentioned Wacker, with the chemistry for solar panels. We are completely dependent on the last producer of one type of chemistry for solar panels, which then go through Chinese production. And the same will apply one day for wind. And that's what I mean with strategic value chains. Let's not presume we'll get that supply all the time throughout history and everything will be stable. We need to take our fate a bit in our own hands. And I think we can do that without making it more expensive. We just need to be smarter. Sorry, Giles, over to you, but it's a topic very close to my heart.
That was a very important point, Marco. So there are 300,000 people working in wind energy in Europe. Today, we have 250 factories making components for turbines, assembling full turbines. And that's great. To stay competitive as a European manufacturing industry, and we also export a lot of equipment outside of Europe, of course, we need to be able to import certain materials and components cheaply from outside of Europe, notably glass fiber for the blades, certain steel components. It's very important the EU gets its trade policy right in that respect, that we have free and open trade because the supply chain is global. At the same time, China has built up a very strong wind turbine manufacturing industry. It's not surprising. They're building far more new wind farms than Europe is at the moment. 5 out of the 10 largest wind turbine manufacturers in the world are Chinese at least. Yeah, and they are big competition. And we need a very proactive European renewables industrial policy supporting both the wind and the solar industries to make sure we stay competitive.
Thanks, Giles. As we don't have so much time left, unfortunately, although we could continue for hours, I guess, on the different topics, I still want to raise one point, Marco, you also mentioned, which is prices. And Diederik and Christian, you were already referring to it earlier, because when we look at prices, the technologies are very cheap today, but the prices that end consumers pay are different. So with a lot of additional elements which are adding up. So in the end, the prices that consumers are paying are not the ones what we see as technology prices. So how can we make sure that the bulk of the energy transition costs, Christian, are not it's not the citizens which have to pay? Is there any alternatives we have, and how can we make sure that it is also about a cheap transition, which is less costly for our citizens in Europe?
Indeed, I think just building on some of the points that have been made here today, I think it's very important for the cost-effective transition that we think about energy efficiency at all times where possible. But looking at the price structures that we have today, we're also looking at one of the biggest problems or obstacles for this transition, and there are a few things that we can actually do right here, right now, to improve that. We don't have a level playing field today. We have a number of polluting sources that are enjoying a free ride, whereas electricity is heavily taxed, heavily burdened. This needs to change. First step is changing the taxation. We have an energy taxation directive in the EU that we can change with a view to ensuring that we get a more fair deal for everybody. Second thing is to look at the ones that are getting a free ride today. Why is it that some sectors are exempted altogether? For instance, if you have a gas stove at home, you're not paying a carbon price for that. You're getting gas into your home, you're burning it, and you're not paying a carbon price for that. That needs to change. We need to make sure that the polluters pay. So look at the sectors that are currently getting a free ride. Same with maritime. Why is there no carbon price on maritime bunker fuels? We need this to change. So there's a question about getting those sectors that are currently not there in scope. And then there's also a question of tightening up the system. We're seeing industries that get their allowances for free under the ETS system still. The power sector is buying all permissions to emit CO2 today. Other sectors are getting a lot of free allowances. And one thing to look at, frankly, also when looking at the business models, is hydrogen here. We have to remember that the vast bulk of hydrogen today is fossil. And this industry is also getting a lot of free allowances. If you squeeze that amount of free allowances, you're also creating a price incentive and an incentive for the additional introduction of clean sources of hydrogen. So there's a few things to work on that absolutely would be critical to get a better price structure.
A few things which also have to be taken up in legislation, and decarbonizing Europe probably needs a lot of guidance and a lot of legislation. We are looking at an unprecedented number of legislative acts coming up, only looking at the Fit for 55 package this summer. So my last question to all of you, and please please give me an answer very short and very precise. What is the piece of legislation which is most important for you, and what are you wishing to see in this piece of legislation? Just two very short answers, please, to my question, and I'll start with Ariana.
Yes, and no surprise that for the Coalition for Energy Savings, the key piece of legislation is the Energy Efficiency Directive. We see that progress on efficiency is very slow and is still slow, with a gap for a 2030 target according to NECP. So we would like to see, first of all, a higher EU binding energy efficiency target of at least 40%. That is supported with a stronger governance also at the national level through binding national contribution, and as well a reinforcement of other measures like the energy saving obligation. But more broadly, and finally, as a last point, I think it will be a missed opportunity if the Fit for 55 package does not build on the positive synergies that I have already mentioned between energy efficiency, renewables, and flexibility. So I think this panel is and your event is the perfect place to say that I'm really looking forward to work with the renewable energy stakeholders to ensure that those synergies between efficiency and renewables are maximized in the Fit for 55 package, and looking forward to work with you in the next months.
Thank you, Ariana. Christian, one big legislative proposal for you and one big wish.
I would point to the ETS directive, and why is that? That's really because this major package will need to have a very, very strong and a wide coverage. So a carbon pricing that has a very, very clear signal and also has a wide coverage. At the same time, the ETS directive will be the one where we need to make sure that there's a balance that allows for the latecomers to also, let's say, hit the curve without being really punished to a level where they can't invest anymore. So this is really a critical piece that needs to be well calibrated against the other complementary targets, and also one where the right balance needs to be struck in order to get a high price signal, but also one that is let's say squareable for many industries. So this is where really some of the key refinements will lie in my view.
Someone else who is putting ETS first? Please raise your hand. No, not really? Okay, Jorgo, what's your piece of legislation? And one very short answer and you're mute. And you're still mute. I would otherwise ask Giles.
Oh, no, I'm muted.
Oh, no, okay, you're good.
So I agree with the previous speakers, all is important. My short answer is next to RED 2 recast I was mentioning already, it's the energy system integration package, which is up in autumn to be presented. And my wish is that state aid rules are relaxed in order to ramp up this hydrogen renewables, the combination of hydrogen and renewables. Thank you.
Thanks, Jorgo. Diederik, if it's not ETS, what is it?
It's hard to choose on the number of things coming to us, but I would say I would pick for this occasion the 10E regulation, which was of course already ongoing, predominantly because I think it's the basis for a broader discussion about the much needed investments. And I know it will not cover everything, but my wish goes beyond the 10E regulation. I would like to see this year that we really start seeing projects coming up, being approved, being implemented, and being brought to the market so that we can start actually building the future-proof system that we need, which will help to better serve all the needs from the users in the grid, including the generators for renewables, as well as the end users in Marco's sector, for example. But it will also help to give a challenging market to my members, which is what we need, and which will probably also have a positive effect in bringing costs down and bringing more innovation into the system, which is what we desperately need.
Thanks, Diederik. Giles, is it 10E for you too?
No, it is the Renewable Energy Directive, Article 19 on guarantees of origin. We have to make it easier for industrial consumers of energy to buy renewables, whether it's renewable electricity or renewable hydrogen. And corporate renewable PPAs are central to that. But corporate renewable PPAs need an effective guarantees of origin system. And Article 19 does not give us that today because it allows governments to withhold guarantees of origin from many renewables generators. And that is a barrier to corporate renewable PPAs that must be removed. So amend Article 19 of the Renewable Energy Directive.
Thanks, Giles. Julie, any of the legislation which has been mentioned already, or another one?
Yes, well, I think that there is so much happening in 2021 that it's hard to choose, and we cannot choose. We have to work on all fronts. But yeah, for the purpose of this discussion, I will choose EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Well, it's been revised quite recently. We still need to see how it's implemented. But if we want to be fit for the 55 target, if we want to be fit for climate neutrality, we definitely have to strengthen even further the role of buildings as a hub for energy system integration. It's a game changer for electrification. It's a game changer for decarbonization as a whole, decentralization of power generation, system energy efficiency and flexibility.
Thanks, Julie. And last but not least, Marco.
Thanks. I'm going to give maybe a strange answer. None of the above. And especially not ETS. And that's a point to Christian. Let's get over this free allocation phobia. I'm sorry. Carbon border measures show there's carbon leakage and measures need to be in place. And it's not making others expensive that makes you cheaper. I think we need to move beyond that debate, even though there's still unjustified things. The real issue, I think, is on finance. And what I mean by that is twofold. Between you making it and us buying it, lots of people are getting paid and making money. There's a lot of charges on the grids, even charges that have nothing to do with energy. I think that's one point to tackle. The second one is every finance minister in Europe now looking at this COVID spending is looking at the ETS as a funding tool. We'll look at energy taxation as a funding tool. And as long as we allow all that money to float into general budget and rightfully so, compensate people for hardship during COVID times, we're not making the transition. So I think where we can unite to say whatever money is generated, DG budget, own resources or not, needs to come back into the energy transition. And here, this is where I really plea to, I think you agree. 70 next qualified projects for the ETS Innovation Fund. The first call was 21 times oversubscribed. So we finally have 20 billion of ideas in industry. We're going to fund 1 billion. We have 70 projects, of which 90% still needs to go. I think what we really need is that now the ideas are there. We need to get the funding in order and not see this as a cash generating tool for everything else, which I'm not sure is which law, probably all of the laws above. But make sure the money doesn't cycle out of the energy transition. Make sure it stays in and we make this change really fast. It's more policy than legislation.
Thanks, Marco. And ETS is for sure a topic which we can discuss in a separate discussion. Thanks to all of you. We didn't have a winner here, but it shows that it's a bouquet, basically, of legislation which we all need and where we all need together in order to make it a success. Thank you all for this lively debate. I'm very much looking forward to continuing working with all of you to make it a success for our sectors, but most of all for Europe. I hope you at your screens also enjoyed it as much as I did. Next, on this first day of the SolarPower Summit, we will bring to you 5 thought leaders to hear from them how ambitious we should and can be in Europe and how solar can drive these ambitions. So please join us again at 3:30 in the afternoon, and in the meanwhile, you can enjoy our wellness stretch break. So stretch your muscles, join us at our stretch break. And please don't miss the opportunity to also watch our national market updates, the inspirational sustainability stories, and our SolarPower Europe team's take on sustainability. And all of that is available for you on demand on our SolarPower Summit platform. If you want to share your thoughts on social media, and we very much encourage you to do so, please use the hashtag SolarPower Summit. For now, happy to see you back at 3:30.